Wyoming, July 1889. The sky had been lying all day, blue in the morning, still by noon. Then the light changed. A stillness settled over the grassland that wasn't peaceful at all. The wind shifted. Not a breeze, a wall of cold, carrying everything wrong about the next 6 hours. And there, in the middle of nowhere, someone sat on a battered trunk, a blue dress soaked through, hands folded in her lap, motionless in the way of someone who has been waiting a very long time. No wagon, no horse, no sign that anyone had passed this road in an hour. Then the first rain began to fall, then hail, then the kind of lightning that doesn't flash and vanish, but hangs in the sky for a full second, like it's making a point. A man pulled his horse up hard, stared, blinked the rain from his eyes. Still there. Wyoming, July 1889. The sky had been lying all day, blue and still in the morning. By noon, and then, around 3 in the afternoon, the light changed. Just slightly, the way it does before something bad happens. Not dramatic. Not the kind of warning that makes a man stop and look up. Just a shift in the quality of the air, a flattening of the color, a stillness that wasn't peaceful. Ellie Holt noticed. He always noticed. He was 2 miles from his cabin, checking the last of his trap line along the eastern ridge, when the wind shifted. Not a breeze, a wall, cold and fast, and smelling like everything wrong about the next 6 hours. It came from the northwest, which meant serious weather. It came fast, which meant no arguing with it. He didn't curse, didn't panic, he just started moving. Because that's what you do when you've lived alone in Wyoming for 8 years. You read the sky like other men read newspapers. You don't argue with it. You don't negotiate. You don't stand there calculating your options while the options narrow around you. You just move the horse, a big gray mare named Bess who had opinions about everything and expressed them freely. Didn't need to be told twice. She was already pulling toward home before Eli touched his heels to her sides. 8 years on this land had given Bess the same instincts he had. She knew bad weather the way she knew his voice. Rain came first, then hail. Small stones at first, then bigger ones that stung through his jacket. Then the kind of lightning that doesn't flash and disappear but hangs in the sky for a full second, like it's making a point. Eli kept his head down, hat pulled low, jacket soaked through in minutes. He'd been caught in worse. He'd been caught in things that made this look like a mild inconvenience. He knew the difference between a storm that could kill you and a storm that just made you miserable, and this one was the second kind. Unpleasant. Not fatal. As long as he kept moving, he was thinking about the roof. A section of it over the south wall had been soft since spring. He'd been meaning to fix it. Kept putting it off in favor of more urgent things. The north fence, the irrigation ditch, the chicken coop that had needed new boards since March. And now a storm like this was going to remind him exactly why procrastination is. He dressed as patience. That was what was in his head. The roof. The soft boards. The bucket he'd have to find in the dark and position in exactly the right spot to catch the drip that would otherwise ruin the floor planks. He'd spent 3 weeks laying. He was not thinking about people, which is why he almost rode right past her. She was sitting on a trunk in the middle of nowhere, off the side of the road, just barely off it, like she'd made a small attempt at being out of the way and then given up. Just sitting there on a battered wooden trunk like she'd been placed there by someone with a very strange sense of humor and no interest in how the joke ended. A woman in a blue dress that had been beautiful about 4 hours ago, hair plastered to her face, hands folded in her lap with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for a very long time and has stopped expecting the wait to end. Eli pulled Bess up hard, stared, blinked rain out of his eyes, still there. He looked left, right, behind him ahead. No wagon, no horse, no sign that any other living person had been anywhere near this road in the past hour. Just flat open grassland, the storm tearing across it like it owned everything, and one woman on one trunk, in the middle of all of it. He sat there for exactly 3 seconds. Then he rode over. She looked up when she heard Bess's hooves on the wet ground. Her eyes were dark, steady, which surprised him more than almost anything else about the situation. He'd expected panic. Tears, maybe. The wild-eyed desperation that comes from being truly alone in a storm in territory you don't know with no help coming. But she wasn't doing any of that. She looked, if anything, like a woman who had already decided she was in serious trouble and was simply waiting to find out what kind. Ma'am. His voice came out rough. He hadn't talked to anyone in 11 days. Hadn't needed to. You hurt? She shook her head. No, not hurt. You got a horse somewhere? Wagon? Anybody coming for you? Another shake. He waited. Because there had to be more. There was always more. I was supposed to be met, she said. Her voice was Eastern, educated, kind of voice that belonged in a parlor in Boston. Or Philadelphia, not on a dirt road in Wyoming during a July storm. At Newman, his name was Randall Hatch. He said he would be here. Ellie looked at the sky, felt the weight of the rain on his shoulders, looked back at her. It's past 5. She didn't flinch, just looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. Yes, she said. I know. He almost asked why she was still here, why she hadn't tried to walk to town, or flagged down the stage, or found some other solution to a situation that had clearly been a problem for 5 hours. But then he looked at the trunk, looked at her dress, looked at the way she was holding herself very carefully still, like someone who'd been keeping it together for a long time, and wasn't going to stop now. Not even for a stranger on a horse asking obvious questions. Mail-order bride. He'd heard about the system. Didn't think much of it. Men advertising for wives like wives were something you ordered from a catalog. Women traveling 2,000 miles on the word of a stranger, on the promise of a life described in letters that could say anything. The whole thing seemed like a setup for exactly this kind of moment. A woman on a trunk in the rain, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. He didn't say any of that. Trunk too heavy to leave. It's everything I own. He dismounted, went to the trunk, lifted it, lighter than he expected, which told him something about how little everything she owned actually weighed. He secured it behind the saddle, took up the reins, and turned to her. You ever ridden a horse? Yes. A pause, very brief, in Boston. In a park. This isn't a park. I can see that. He extended his hand. She looked at it for 1 second, just one. Then she took it without hesitation. Without the performance of reluctance that some people felt they had to put on when accepting help from a stranger. She just took it. He got her up in front of him, one arm around her waist to keep her steady, and turned best north. The woman was shaking cold, probably, or fear, or both, or the particular kind of shaking that comes when you've been holding yourself completely still for 5 hours and suddenly someone else is taking the weight of the situation. He didn't ask, just pulled her a little closer and pointed best toward home. 3 miles never felt so long. The lightning came in sheets now. Hail hit his back like thrown stones. Bess was moving fast, head down, sure-footed on a road she'd traveled 100 times. And still, every minute felt like a negotiation with something that wanted to end badly. The ground was already muddy. The creek somewhere to the west would be rising. He needed to get home before the road turned from difficult to impassable. The woman didn't make a sound, not one. He'd expect something, crying, maybe. Some commentary on the situation. Some expression of fear or gratitude or anger. Instead, she just sat there in front of him, leaning back slightly, letting him take the reins of everything. And that silence was somehow harder to deal with than any amount of noise would have been. He didn't know what to do with quiet dignity. He was better with problems he could see. When the cabin finally appeared through the rain, just a dark shape at first, then the porch, then the window, then smoke from the chimney where the fire he'd built that morning was still going. Eli felt something unknot in his chest that he hadn't fully realized was tight. Small place. 1 room, with a sleeping loft above and a stone fireplace he'd built himself the first winter, badly, then torn out and rebuilt the second winter, better. Windows he'd cut and framed himself, which let in more light than he'd expected when he planned them, and exactly the right amount when the isolation started pressing in during year 2. A porch that leaned slightly to the left, which he'd stopped noticing around year 4. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and right now, dry was everything. He got her inside, got the fire going higher, dug out his spare clothes from the chest in the corner, a flannel shirt, heavy work pants, wool socks, the kind of practical ugly things that kept you alive in this country, and had no interest in looking like anything except what they were. He hung a blanket from the rafter beam with a piece of rope, making a divider between the fireside and the sleeping side. Not elegant. Functional. These'll be big, he said, holding the clothes out around the edge of the blanket. They'll be warm. She took them. Matter of fact. He turned his back, went to work on the fire, adding wood until the heat was real rather than just present, changed his own soaked clothes for dry ones, moving by feel and habit in the dim light. Checked the roof. Yes. The south wall was dripping exactly where he'd known it would drip, and he set the bucket, listening to the steady ping of water hitting tin, and told himself he'd fix it next week. He always told himself next week. She came out from behind the blanket, looking like she was wearing a tent that had done her a small personal favor. His shirt reached her knees. The sleeves had been rolled until they gave up and became something more like cuffs at her elbows. Her hair was loose now, freed from whatever arrangement the storm had already destroyed, and it fell dark and damp past her shoulders, and without the ruined dress and the road mud and the rain, she looked younger than she had on the road. 25, maybe 26. She looked at the cabin, took it in. All of it, every rough board and crooked nail and 8 years of a man living alone, with no interest in making things prettier than functional. She looked at it the way people look at things when they're deciding how to feel about them, not judging, assessing. Ely poured coffee, handed her a cup without ceremony. She took it with both hands, closed her eyes for a moment when the heat hit her palms, and he saw, just briefly, just for a second before she controlled it, what 5 hours in the rain on a trunk had actually cost her. They sat fire cracking, rain hammering the roof, the bucket pinging, wind finding every gap in the walls that he kept meaning to seal and kept not sealing. "Thank you," she said finally. "You didn't have to stop, couldn't not stop." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. Some men would have. He didn't answer that. Because she was right, and there was nothing useful to say about men who would leave a woman in a storm, and the coffee was getting cold. "Nora Voss," she said. Eli Holt, a silence, easier than the one before it. "How far is town?" she asked. 15 miles east. Iron Falls, she nodded slowly. Absorbing that, 15 miles was a long way on a good day. Tonight it was impossible. And the man. "Randall Hatch, do you know him?" Ely looked at the fire. "Know of him. Got a land operation south of here. Big spread. Comes through Iron Falls a few times a year." She was quiet for a moment. "Just the rain. He's not going to come," she said. Flat. Not angry, not even sad exactly. Just a fact she was saying out loud because she needed to hear herself say it. Because saying things out loud makes them real, and real things can be dealt with, and unreal things just sit on your chest. Ely didn't lie to her. "No, he's not." She nodded, like she'd already known. Like she'd known since noon, and had just needed 5 hours to finish knowing it. "Then, I'll need to figure out what comes next," she said. "Tonight you sleep. Tomorrow you figure." She looked at him, a long look, the kind that's a question rather than a stare. "I'll take the barn," he said. "You don't have to, it's my barn. I'll do what I want with it." Something crossed her face. Not quite a smile. Close enough. He grabbed a blanket. Told her the fire would hold through the night if she kept it fed, showed her where the wood was, and headed for the door. Stopped with his hand on the latch. "Lock up behind me. I will." He went out into the rain. The barn was cold and dark and smelled like horse and hay, and the particular honest smell of animals sheltered against weather. He had a lantern and enough dry hay, and the sound of Bess and the Bay, gelding, breathed steadily in their stalls, which was more company than he generally needed. He didn't sleep much. He thought about the roof, the bucket, the south wall boards, and the woman in his cabin. He was 35 years old. He had come to this piece of land at 27, after Sarah. After 2 years of trying to make something work that neither of them had actually wanted. After the morning, He came back from checking fence lines to find the cabin empty and a note on the table that said she was sorry, truly sorry, but this wasn't the life she'd imagined, and she couldn't keep pretending that it was. After that morning, he had stood in the empty cabin for a long time and then gone outside and started clearing the north field because the north field needed clearing and standing, still felt something he couldn't afford. He had built this homestead from nothing, acre by acre, season by season, through 8 winters that each tried to teach him something about what he was made of. He had learned to like the silence, or at least to stop fighting it. He had told himself he was not a man who needed anyone. He'd told himself that so many times that almost stopped feeling like something he had to tell himself. Almost. He heard the rain on the barn roof shift from hard to lighter. By 3 in the morning, just a drip. By 4, nothing. He slept a little after that. He was up before dawn, fed the horses, milked the cow, checked the chicken coop for storm damage. One loose board he'd fixed today. Nothing serious. Normal morning. Completely normal. Except it wasn't. Because when he walked back across the yard toward the cabin, there was smoke coming from the chimney. He stopped, looked at it. Smoke. For 8 years, the math of his mornings had been simple. When he was in the cabin, there was fire. When he wasn't in the cabin, there wasn't. There was no one else to make it. That was the math of solitude. You leave, the fire goes out. You come back, you make it again. The chimney only spoke when he told it to. Someone else had spoken to it. He stood in the yard for a moment, not moving, not quite knowing what to do with this information. Then he smelled it, bacon. Eli Holt stood in the middle of his yard, in the cold morning air, and smelled bacon cooking in cabin, and felt something shift in his chest that he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not a dramatic shift, not the kind you notice and name and remember later. Just a small movement, like a door that's been stuck for so long that you've stopped trying to open it, quietly, gently coming loose on its hinge without anyone pushing. He went inside. She was at his stove, still wearing his 2 big clothes, but she'd done something with her hair, pinned it up with what appeared to be 2 sticks from the kindling pile and whatever else she'd found in her trunk. The cabin was different. He couldn't say exactly how at first. Then he saw it piece by piece. She'd cleaned. Not tidied, actually cleaned. The floor was swept. His scattered tools and traps had been organized against the wall in a way that made logical sense. The table had been wiped down. The windows were cleaner than they'd been since he'd installed them. And on the table, in a jar he hadn't known he owned, was a small bunch of wildflowers, purple and yellow ones. Still wet from the storm. She must have found them by the porch steps. He stood in the doorway. She didn't turn around. I hope you don't mind. I found eggs and bacon in your cold box. I wasn't good to sleep anymore after 4 o'clock, and I needed something to do with my hands. He looked at the flowers, looked at the floor, looked at the woman who had in approximately 7 hours made his cabin look like somewhere a person might actually choose to live, rather than somewhere a person was simply surviving. Sit down, she said. It'll get cold. He sat down. She put a plate in front of him. Eggs cooked exactly right. Bacon crisp. Toast, which she'd managed somehow from his basic supplies, with the last of his butter scraped thin but applied evenly. It was the best breakfast he'd eaten in 8 years, and he was aware of this in a way that was uncomfortable. She sat across from him and ate too, and they didn't talk for a while. And the silence between them was a different kind of silence than the kind he was used to. His usual silence was the absence of something. This one had a presence to it, my mother insisted I learn to cook, she said eventually. Even though we had a cook. She said a woman should know how to feed herself and her family regardless of her circumstances in life. A pause. She was right about that, if not about much else. Smart woman, she was. Another pause. Brief. She died 4 years ago. Then my father. Then the money. She said it like a list of facts rather than a catalog of grief. Not cold, just honest. I had 2 choices when it was all gone. Governess or wife. The letters from Mr. Hatch seemed... She stopped. Started again. They seemed genuine. He described Wyoming as something worth building toward. He said He needed a woman with good sense more than pretty manners. Ellie said nothing. He was a considerably better liar than I gave him credit for, she said. They finished breakfast without talking. He looked at the table, the flowers, the clean floor. Roads will be soft after last night, he said. Give it a couple of days before anything can get through. She looked at him. You can stay until they dry out. And then? He hadn't thought that far ahead. Then I'll take you in to Iron Falls. You can figure out next steps from there. She considered this with the same steadiness she'd shown on the road. What do people do in Iron Falls? For work. For women who have no references, no connections, and arrived as someone's mail-order bride, and are now very visibly not anyone's bride at all, he thought about Iron Falls. 300 people and their collective opinions, none of which stood still for long. Most women there were wives and mothers. A few did laundry for hire. There was the boarding house. Willa Sutton's place, which was clean and respectable and run by a woman who understood things. That was about it. He didn't have a good answer for her. We'll figure it out, he said. She looked like she wanted to push back on that. Then didn't. Just nodded, once. The nod of someone who has decided to take a problem 1 hour at a time. He stood up. I've got fence to check on the North Line, storm damage. You can come or stay. Your choice. She looked at her hands. Then at the door, then at him. I'll come. She was not a ranch woman. This was apparent from the first 5 minutes on the North Line. She wore her good shoes because she had no other kind, and within half a mile they were caked with mud in a way that clearly pained her, but that she said absolutely nothing about. She picked her way across the wet grass with careful deliberateness, watching where she put her feet. Not complaining, not asking to slow down, she watched everything he did. Not the way someone watches when they're waiting for it to be over. The way someone watches when they're actually learning work. When each thing you observe is going into a structure in your head that you're actively building. He showed her how to check a fence post for stability, how to feel with your hands whether the wood had rotted at the ground line or the post had been pushed by the freeze-thaw cycles over winter. She tried it. She tried. Didn't get it right the first time. Got it exactly right the second, with no instruction between the attempts. He showed her which cloud formations meant more rain coming, and which were just weather moving through. She looked at the sky for a long time, asked 2 questions. Good questions. The kind that meant she'd understood the first thing and was building on it, not the kind that meant she'd missed the first thing and was hoping he wouldn't notice. He didn't tell her the questions were good. He just answered them. By noon they were both sweating despite the cool air. The storm had left the temperature down, which was the one mercy it offered. He pumped water at the well, and she took a drink from the ladle and then wiped her face with her sleeve, leaving a streak of mud across one cheek that she didn't notice, and that he didn't mention. This is harder than I expected, she said. Yes, but not impossible. No. She looked at him. I learned fast. He believed her. He didn't have a good reason for why he believed her so quickly. He just did. That evening she do, from his supplies, which seemed to him exactly as they'd always been. Flour, dried beans, some canned goods, a few potatoes that had made it through the winter in the root cellar, some dried herbs he'd bought in town, and never found occasion to use. She turned them into something that made the cabin smell like the kind of place where people ate well and were glad of it. They ate on the porch because the evening after the storm was worth sitting in. The air scrubbed clean, the light doing something complicated and beautiful with the clouds, the prairie stretching out in every direction with that particular quality it had after rain, when everything smelled alive. My father used to say sunsets were an apology, she said. For what? For difficult days. She was quiet for a moment. I was angry at him for a long time, for leaving me with nothing, for making choices that unmade everything we had. A pause. But sitting on that trunk yesterday, waiting for a man who wasn't going to come, I started thinking that maybe losing what my father built was the only thing that got me to this road, on this day. Which got me here, she gestured, vaguely, at the cabin and the yard and the sky. That might sound strange, doesn't He said they sat until the stars came out, one by one at first and all at once, the way they do in Wyoming, where there's nothing between you and the sky. Ellie went to the barn. Nora went inside. One day became 3. 3 became 5. She stopped asking when the road would be passable. He stopped bringing it up. They both stopped pretending the question was the important one. They settled into a rhythm without discussing it or negotiating it or even fully acknowledging it. It just happened. The way routines happen when 2 practical people occupy the same space and both have enough sense to see what needs doing. He handled the heavy work, the livestock, the fencing, the firewood, anything that required sustained strength or knowledge of how the land worked. She handled the cabin, the garden, the chickens, the ledger that she'd discovered in the desk drawer and had begun going through with an expression that suggested she found its condition alarming. But the division wasn't rigid. He found himself helping with the weeding one afternoon when she'd been at it since dawn and was flagging. She showed up beside him at the fence line the following morning with tools she'd figured out how to use just from watching him the day before, on the 6th day. Something happened that he hadn't expected. He laughed. She was attempting to return an escaped chicken to the coop, and the chicken, a particularly opinionated bird that Eli had been in conflict with for going on 2 years, had completely different ideas about where it wanted to be. The negotiation between them, a woman in borrowed clothes and ruined shoes, and a bird with no concept of compromise, had devolved into something that bore no resemblance to what either party had intended. Nora was addressing the chicken in precise, formal language, which was making the situation significantly worse, and at some point she turned to Eli with absolute seriousness and said, "I believe it's being deliberately difficult, and something in him just came apart." He laughed, not a polite sound. Not the short X serves as a social placeholder for amusement. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere you forgot you had. Nora looked startled for a moment, then she laughed too. They got the chicken in eventually. The chicken remained unrepentant. He started noticing things he hadn't let himself notice before. The way she put fresh wild flowers in that jar on the table, every single morning, always in that same jar, always a different arrangement. The way she hummed to herself while she worked, not full songs, just fragments, like her thoughts had a soundtrack that occasionally surfaced. The way she read the sky now, actually looking up at it, with the same attention she gave everything, getting the reading right more often than not. She was learning his world. And he was noticing things that had no practical application whatsoever. The color of her eyes in evening light, which was different from morning light. The way she moved her hands when she was explaining something. The small lines at the corners of her mouth that appeared when she was about to say something with an edge to it. He told himself to stop noticing. He kept noticing. On the 8th day she found it. She was reorganizing her trunk, looking for practical clothes, something she could actually work in without destroying the few good things she had left. And in the inside pocket, folded and creased like it had been stuffed there quickly and without care, was an envelope she hadn't put there. She recognized the handwriting on the outside immediately, Randall Hatch, addressed to someone named R. Cleary, Falls, Wyoming Territory. She shouldn't open it, she knew that. Private correspondence that had found its way to her by mistake. Not hers to read, she opened it. She read it twice, slowly both times. Then a third time. Because the first 2 times she'd been hoping she'd misunderstood, she hadn't. It was a financial document wearing the clothes of a letter. Brief, businesslike. Hatch confirming receipt of fees from something called the Westward Matrimonial Bureau, and instructing someone named Cleary to continue processing new inquiries and preparing accounts. 3 names were listed as accounts receivable. Her name was one. The other 2 were women she'd never heard of. Other women traveling, probably right now, from other cities on the eastern seaboard toward other crossroads in other territories, waiting for a man who was never going to show up, because that was what this was. Not cold feet, not a change of heart, not a mother's objection or a business complication, a scheme. She sat on the edge of her trunk for a long time. She should hear the wind, the horses, in the barn, the sound of Eli somewhere out in the yard doing something practical and necessary. Then she folded the letter carefully, put it in the pocket of the flannel shirt, and went back to her unpacking. She said nothing that day, or the next. She needed to understand the full shape of it before she said anything to anyone. That was how she'd always worked. Think first, be certain, speak when you know what you mean. Her father had called it stubbornness. Her mother had called it precision. She was still doing her precise thinking when she heard the hoofbeats. 3 horses. 1 rider she recognized and 2 she didn't. Randall Hatch rode up to the cabin, like a man paying a social call he considered beneath. Him, well-dressed, Wyoming well, which meant the boots were expensive and the jacket had been good once. Dark hair, clean-shaved, the kind of face that worked in parlors and lobbies. And anywhere charm carried more weight than substance. He didn't look at her first, he looked at the cabin. The garden she'd been working, the woodpile, the fence line stretching north. He looked at the land the way certain men look at things, calculating what it was worth, not what it was. Then he looked at her, Miss Voss, very smooth. "I'm glad to see you found shelter. There was a terrible miscommunication with the Bureau. I sent word, but clearly it didn't reach you in time." She said nothing. "There's no need for this to be complicated," he continued, walking toward her. "I feel terrible about what happened." The arrangement simply stopped. She looked at him steadily. "How many?" A pause. Controlled and brief. "I beg your pardon? How many women?" Something moved in his face. Very small. A tightening around the eyes. She'd been watching people navigate social situations her whole life, and she saw it. The moment of calculation. "I don't know what you don't." Her voice stayed level. She had decided somewhere between reading the letter and this moment that she would not give him the satisfaction of seeing anything except clarity. "I found the letter, the one you wrote to Cleary, the one in your handwriting with 3 names on it and the word fees." Silence. The 2 men behind him shifted in their saddles. Hatch didn't turn around. "That letter is private property," he said. "It was in my trunk. It arrived there by your error. I'll need it back. I'm sure you will." She heard footsteps on the porch. Didn't look, knew. Ellie came off the porch, without hurrying, came to stand beside her, not in front of her, not between her and Hatch, but beside, and just stood there, hands at his sides. Looking at Randall Hatch with patience that had nothing to do with patience, Hatch looked at him. The calculation happened in about a second. The kind of quick arithmetic men do when deciding whether they have the advantage. He decided he didn't. Not today. Not with Eli Holt standing 2 feet away, looking like he had nothing to prove and all the time in the world. "This isn't finished," Hatch said to Nora, pointedly not to Eli. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He mounted up, looked down at her. "You came here under a contractual arrangement, Miss Voss. Your father's estate accepted payments through the Bureau before his passing. Those obligations don't disappear." She said nothing. "I'll be back," he said. Ellie spoke for the first time. Quiet even. "Next time you want to visit, you come alone." Hatch looked at him. Ellie looked back. Hatch left. They stood in the garden and watched him go until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely into the prairie and the silence came back. And it was just the wind in the grass and the chickens making their small, unconcerned sounds. Then Nora said, "I need to tell you something." They sat at the table. She put the letter between them. He picked it up and read it once, carefully, without expression. Set it down. Said nothing for a long moment, looking at the wall. "How many do you think there are?" he said finally. "At minimum 3 that I know of. Probably more. He's been running this for a while. The handwriting in that letter is practiced. The language is practiced. That's not someone who improvised this." Eli looked at the letter again. He said contractual obligation. "My father accepted money from the Bureau before he died. I didn't know. I wouldn't have known. I just answered advertisement and paid my own train fare." She paused. "The claim probably has no legal standing. But legally sound matters less than it should when a man arrives with 2 people behind him and a document in his hand. He's coming back. Yes, he was quiet. She waited. You didn't bring this, he said. Not sharp, just definite. He brought it. There's a difference. She looked at the letter. I should go to town, talk to the reverend there. Find out what actual protection exists for a woman in my situation under territorial law. We'll go together. She looked up. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He started clearing the table with the efficient movements of someone who'd been doing it alone for years. Day after tomorrow. Road should be solid enough by then. She watched him for a moment. This man who moved through his own space like every corner of it knew him. Like the land itself had decided a long time ago that he belonged, and had simply arranged itself around him. Why are you helping me? She said. He didn't stop moving, stacked a plate, set a cup on the shelf. Because you needed it. That's not enough reason. Not for this much. He turned around, looked at her directly, which he didn't always do. Usually he looked at the thing he was talking about, or the middle distance, or somewhere useful. But now he looked at her. You sat on that trunk for 5 hours, he said, waiting for a man who wasn't coming. And you didn't fall apart. You just waited. That kind of person. You don't leave them on a road. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at the letter, folded it carefully, put it in her pocket. Day after tomorrow, she said. Day after tomorrow. He went to the barn. She sat at the table for a while after he left. The fire was doing its work. The barn was quiet. The stars were beginning at the edges of the dark sky outside the window, one at a time and then faster. She thought about Boston, the house she'd grown up in, sold for debts she hadn't made, the life she'd planned, comfortable, quiet, the kind of life that suited people who were good at being useful. That had come apart. So gradually she hadn't noticed until there was nothing left. She thought about the letter, the women whose names were on it. Strangers on trains right now, probably. Watching the landscape change as they moved west. She thought about Eli Holt, who had stopped his horse in a storm because he could not stop, who was sleeping in a barn so she could have a roof, who cleaned a plate and set a cup on a shelf and looked at her, like she was a problem worth the effort of understanding. She thought about the land outside that window. She'd been looking at it for 8 days, and it was starting to have a shape to her. The ridge to the east and how it caught the morning light. The creek in the south corner and the way its sound changed with the water level. The sky that just went, out here, went in every direction without stopping, until you felt either very small or very free, depending on what kind of person you were. She was still figuring out what kind she was. But she was starting to think it might be the second kind. On the morning of the 10th day, the road had dried enough. They rode into Iron Falls side by side, Nora on the bay gelding. Eli had saddled for her, sitting it well enough that he didn't have to pay constant attention to her, which was more than he'd expected given her earlier statement about parks in Boston. Iron Falls was 300 people and their combined opinions, all of which formed quickly and held strongly. By the time they reached the church, word had already circulated, the way word always circulates in small places, not through any particular mechanism, but through the simple physics of information moving faster than people when there isn't much of either. Reverend Daniel Foss was in his 60s, with the kind of face that had seen enough frontier life to stop being surprised by any of it. He listened to everything, read the letter carefully, set it down. The contractual claim, he said finally. It's what a lawyer would call aggressive argumentation built on thin ground. Hatches depending on territorial law being sparse, and enforcement being sparser. If you had legal representation, it would go nowhere. Without one, he spread his hands. Without one, Nora said, he has practical leverage, if not legal leverage. She understood the distinction. Foss looked at Eli. Is she staying? Ellie looked at Nora. And then he said something he hadn't planned to say, something that came from a place he hadn't consulted in advance. I was going to ask her that. Foss looked at him, looked at Nora, looked back at Eli. You mean? I'd like her to stay. Properly, He was looking at the table rather than at either of them. He was aware this was not the most romantic presentation in the history of the territory. She's capable, she works hard, and a woman with her name on the property has protections a guest doesn't. Nora said nothing. That's one reason. Foss said carefully, a pause. There are other reasons, Eli said. To the table. I'm not good at saying them. Nora looked at him. You don't have to. He looked up. She looked at him steadily, those dark eyes that he had stopped trying to stop noticing. Ask me properly, she said. He straightened. Nora Voss, I'm asking you to stay. As my wife. Not just because it's practical, though it is, but because places bestowed for 8 years, and in 10 days, it feels more like a home than it has in all of that time combined. And I don't want to drive you to town and say goodbye and go back to what it was before. Silence the fire in Foss's small office. The sounds of iron falls outside the window, a wagon, someone calling a name. 4 weeks, Nora said. He waited. Give us 4 weeks. To be certain, to prepare properly, to make sure we both understand what we're agreeing to. She looked at him. And then I'll give you my answer. If the answer is no, I'll have found another arrangement by then, and you'll take me to town, and that'll be the end of it. A pause. But, Eli, I don't think the answer is going to be no. Foss looked between them. The mountain man who'd come down off the ridge, and the woman who'd arrived in a storm. 2 people building something out of pieces that had no right to fit together. I'll post the banns, he said. They left the church to find half town happening to be passing by on the street outside. Willa Sutton was first. She was always first. 52 years old, ran the boarding house, had no patience for pretending she didn't know things she knew. Eli Holt, she said. Marrying, she looked at Nora. Back at Eli. Well, he agreed. She any good? Nora answered before he could. At what? Willa looked at her with the long, thorough look of a woman who catalogs everything and misplaces nothing. At all of it, she said. I'm learning fast, Nora said. Willa made a sound. Not quite approval. Not disapproval either. The sound of someone revising their expectations upward. Come see me before you head back, she said. I'll send things with you. A woman starting a homestead needs more than good intentions. At the general store, Eli told Nora to choose fabric. She went straight to the practical end of the bolts. Checked 2. Checked a third. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who knew what they were looking at. This one, she said. Cream-colored calico. Simple, good quality where it mattered. She got the calico thread buttons, and then, almost as an afterthought, a small spool of dark blue ribbon that she looked at for a moment before setting it on the counter. He didn't say anything about the ribbon. He paid. They loaded what Willa gave them, preserves and a spare quilt, and 3 laying hens in a wooden crate that were deeply and vocally unhappy about the entire situation, and started back. Halfway home, Nora said. People will talk about us, already are. They think this is practical. Some of it is. Yes, she looked at the road ahead, but I want you to know something. When you stopped your horse in that storm, you didn't know me. It cost you nothing to keep riding. She glanced at him. But you stopped. And that told me something before anything else did. He said nothing. It told me what kind of man you are, she said. He kept his eyes on the road. His hands on the reins were steady. His chest was doing something he didn't have a word for. 4 weeks, he said. 4 weeks, she agreed. At the edge of the property, where the road curved north and you could see the cabin and the fence line and the creek glinting. In the last light, Eli pulled Bess up for a moment, just looked at it. He had built every part of what was in front of him, made it something from nothing through 8 winters, 1 season at a time, and now, beside him, Nora Voss was looking at it too, not like a stranger. Like someone deciding whether it was worth fighting for. He thought, from the look on her face, that she might be deciding yes. The unhappy hens voiced their continued objections. Bess flicked an ear. The creek went on. He clicked his tongue, and they rode the last quarter-mile together. Toward the smoke rising from the chimney, toward the light in the window she'd left burning, toward whatever came next. Wyoming. August into September 1889. 4 weeks to be certain, 4 weeks to prepare, 4 weeks to decide whether two people who barely knew each other could build something real from something that had started in a storm. Eli gave her the 4 weeks, and then some. Because here's the thing about 4 weeks when you're actually paying attention to them. They go faster than makes sense. You wake up, and it's Tuesday, and she's asking the right questions again, and you're at the fence line gather, and then you blink, and 3 weeks have passed, and you're still finding reasons to stay at the table after supper. He would not say this out loud. He had a reputation for being a man of few words, and he intended to maintain it. The first week was mostly practical, which suited him. He started on the addition, a second room off the east wall, real framing, real boards, a door with an actual latch, something that would give them both proper space and proper privacy. The kind of arrangement that made a partnership out of a marriage rather than an inconvenience. Nora helped. More than he expected. She held boards steady without being asked, handed him nails at exactly the right moment. And when he made a mistake in the framing, got a measurement wrong by enough to matter, she noticed before he did and pointed it out without making it into anything. He fixed it without comment. She didn't say, "I told you so." He respected that more than he would have admitted to anyone. In the evening, she worked on the dress. Cream calico spread across the table, her dark head bent over it in the lamplight, needle moving in and out with the same precision she brought to everything. She was methodical, patient. She didn't rush what couldn't be rushed. He started coming inside later than he needed to, just to sit by the fire while she worked, just to be in the same room. He told himself it was because the barn got cold at night and the barn wasn't worth it. He was lying to himself. But he was doing it quietly, so it was fine. The second week, she took over the ledger. It started when she asked a straightforward question about the egg sales, and he couldn't give her a precise number, and she looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite judgment, but was in the same neighborhood, and then she sat down and asked to see his records. His records were 2 pieces of paper and a system that lived entirely in his head. "You're profitable," she said, after an hour with pencil and paper. "More than you think. I know I'm profitable. You don't know by how much. Your egg operation is underpriced. Willa Sutton is charging twice what you're charging, and she buys from you." He looked at her. "Which is good business on her part," Nora said. "No heat in it, just facts. It would also be good business on yours to renegotiate. I don't like negotiating." "I do." Silence. "Is that a yes?" she asked. "That's a not arguing with you." She almost smiled. "I'll take it." She went to see Willa alone the following week. Borrowed the bay gelding, rode 15 miles to town, came back with a new pricing arrangement and a jar of preserved peaches as a goodwill gesture. "She drives a hard bargain," Nora said. "So do you, apparently. That's $6 more a month." Consistently, he turned the peach jar in his hands. $6 was seed for spring, a new plow blade, the difference between comfortable and calculated. "Thank you," he said. She looked slightly surprised, then looked away at the barn, at the fence line. "I want it to work," she said. "Quiet, serious, this place. I want it to actually work." He understood she didn't just mean the financials. "It already works better than it did," he said. She looked at him. He went back to the addition. The bands were posted on the first Sunday. Iron Falls listened with the particular quality of attention that small communities reserve for news they were mostly aware of and are glad to have confirmed officially. Mrs. Deering, whose husband owned the feed store and who had opinions about everything and organized them well, looked Nora up and down out to the church. "You're the mail-order bride," she said. "I was going to be," Nora said pleasantly. "As it turned out, I became something else." "And what's that?" "A woman who chose where she ended up, a beat, rather than where she was sent." Mrs. Deering opened her mouth. Closed it, opened it again. "Well," she said, "yes." Nora agreed. Ellie watched from 3 feet away and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Impressed. Genuinely, straightforwardly impressed. He didn't say so. But Nora caught his eye on the walk back to the horses, and whatever she saw in his face made her look away quickly with the corners of her mouth doing something. She was clearly managing. He managed his face too. They were good at that between them. The addition was finished on a Wednesday. He hung the door, fitted the latch, stepped back and looked at it. Nora came to stand beside him. A real door, a real room, small, with one window that let in the morning light at a slight angle because the framing was a few degrees off, which would bother him for years. "It's good work," she said. "It's adequate, Eli." She looked at him. "It's good work." He looked at the window angle. "Thank you," he said. She touched the doorframe briefly, one hand on the wood. 4 weeks is up tomorrow," she said. He said nothing. "I know what my answer is." "I've known for a while." She turned to look at him. "I just wanted to say, before it becomes official, I came here with the trunk, a foot, and a letter from a man who didn't mean a single word of found. And somehow I found. She stopped, started again. "I found." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "I know," he said again. She exhaled, nodded. Went inside. He stood at the door for a moment, then went to check on the horses, because he needed something to do with his hands. The wedding was on a Saturday, September 14th, 1889. Cool morning, high sky. The kind of Wyoming produces occasionally as a reminder of what it's capable of when it's not trying to kill you. Eli wore the suit he'd borrowed from the store owner, who kept it for funerals and weddings and told Eli he hoped it would mostly be used for the latter from this point forward. Nora wore the cream calico dress with the blue ribbon, a thin, dark line at the collar and at the cuffs. Small. Exactly right. Wildflowers in her hair, the same purple and yellow ones she always put in the jar. Her hair pinned up. She came around the corner of the cabin into the morning light, and Eli forgot what he was holding. He was holding his hat. He remembered that after a moment, stood there with his hat in his hands, and felt every single thing he'd been carefully not saying out loud arrive. All at once, she saw his face. Something in hers went soft, just briefly, just a moment. Then Willa Sutton, who had come for reasons she called practical and which were entirely sentimental, said, "Let's get on with it before the weather changes its mind," and the moment moved forward into ceremony. Reverend Foss married them in front of the cabin. Not the church, not the town, their land. That was right. The ceremony should happen where they were building the thing. 20 people from Iron Falls had ridden out. Nobody asked them to. They just came. Foss read the words he'd been reading for 40 years. Eli said his part, clear and even. Nora said hers without wavering. He put a plain gold band on her finger, simple and solid, nothing elaborate. She looked at it on her hand. Foss pronounced them married. The 20 people clapped, and Willa produced a cake with the timing of someone who had planned this effect precisely, which she had. Eli stood in the middle of their property. Theirs now, officially, watching Nora talk to the blacksmith's wife with the ease of someone who'd been here for years. "You look confused," she said, handing him a plate of cake. "I'm not confused. You look like you're trying to figure out how something happened." "I'm figuring out how something happened." She raised an eyebrow. "It's a good kind of figuring," he said. She smiled. "The real one, not the careful public version. The actual one with the full corners and the small lines at the edges of her eyes that he had noticed and cataloged, and very carefully not examined too closely. It was a good day, a genuinely good day. He hadn't had many of those in 8 years. He stored this one somewhere permanent. 2 weeks after the wedding, someone burned the South KROO. Ellie smelled it before he saw it. Woke at 3 in the morning to smoke and was out before he was fully awake. Moving on instinct, Nora was right behind him. He'd told her to stay inside. She didn't. They stood at the edge of the south field and watched the grain storage go up. He checked the wind direction first, not carrying, thankfully. Whoever did this knew what they were doing, a contained burn. Maximum damage to a specific target. No risk of spread. Not an accident. A message. They couldn't save the Kero. They kept the fence line and the field. When it was over in the gray hour before dawn, they stood in the ash and looked at each other. Her face streaked with smoke, breathing hard. "That wasn't lightning," she said. "No, Hatch, or someone working for him." She looked at what remained of their winter stores. The silence where the calculation was happening behind her eyes was visible. "All right," she said. "What do we have? Not who did this. Not I can't believe. Just, what do we have? Where do we start from?" He told her. She listened, nodded twice. "We'll need to go to Willa. The blacksmith might extend credit, and I've keep inking a secondary egg count. The ledger is behind." She paused. "It's going to be tight. But we're not going to starve," he believed her. Which wasn't nothing. Eli Holt did not believe things easily. He'd learned that believing easily was how you got hurt. You believed the weather would hold. You believed the river wouldn't rise. You believed a person would stay. He believed Nora. October came hard and fast, the way Wyoming October comes. Like it's been waiting impatiently on the other side of September and has things to prove. Snow, cold with weight to it. Ice on the water trough every morning. She adapted to winter the way she'd adapted to everything, by observing, then doing better. She reorganized the cold storage, started a log of daily temperatures, made curtains from dress scraps that reduced the cold in the cabin by a measurable amount. She hummed constantly in winter. Like the cold required a soundtrack, he started recognizing which fragment matched which mood. He didn't tell her this. It was the 15th of October when the accident happened. He'd been working alone, Nora occupied with the chickens, and what appeared to be a reorganization, requiring her full attention and chickens' full protest. A tree had come down across the north path in the first snow. He'd gone to clear it. Still job. The ground under the snow was softer than he'd realized. When he then got the crosscut saw working and the tree shifted, the movement disturbed the slope above him, just enough. Not an avalanche, just a large section of frozen earth giving way, slowly and then all at one time to cool, mostly. His left leg didn't make it. He heard the sound before the pain arrived, a deep crack inside the bone. He did not make a sound because there was no one to hear, and making sounds for no audience was a waste of energy. He cataloged the situation quickly. Half a mile from the cabin, snow, broken leg. 2 options, wait or move. He started moving, 40 minutes. He used the saw handle as a prop. The cold was useful. Numbed things it wouldn't have numbed in warmer weather. One step, then the next. He was 50 yards from the cabin when she found him. She must have looked up from the chickens and not seen him anywhere, and known. The way you sometimes know that something was wrong. She came around the barn corner at a run, stopped. Looked at him, "Eli, I'm fine." "You are not fine. The leg is. I can see what the leg is, already moving toward him, getting her shoulder under his arm. How long have you been?" "About 40 minutes. Like she was filing it somewhere specific for later. "You've been out here for 40 minutes like this. No one to call." She made a sound he hadn't heard from her before. Not anger, not fear. Something that was both of those things with something else underneath. The sound of a person who has decided they care about someone and is suddenly confronted with the full cost of that. He would name it later. He'd have time to name it, lying in bed for 8 weeks. Dr. Aldridge came from Iron Falls, examined the leg, set his face in the careful way doctors set their faces when the news is not catastrophic but is not good. "Clean break," he said. "Relatively, but complex. Off this leg completely for 8 weeks. Ellie said nothing. 8 weeks, Nora repeated, in the tone of someone making sure the message had been received and would be retained. No wait, no exceptions. If you push this, you lose the leg. That's anatomy, not a warning. After Aldridge left, Eli lay on the bed Nora had made up by the fire and looked at the ceiling. 8 weeks. The whole of winter in 2 words. The trap lines. The livestock. The fence maintenance. The water. Everything he'd built his days around for 8 years handed to someone else. He lay there and felt the specific weight of being unable. It had nothing to do with the leg. "You'll do what Aldridge said," Nora said from across the room. Nora, Eli. She came and stood at the foot of his bed, looking at him directly. "You built this place by yourself for 8 years. Everything here exists because of what you did." She paused. "Now let me." He looked at her. "Let me take this," she said. 8 weeks, let me." The silence held. "The water trough freezes by 6 every morning," he said. You have to break it before you feed, I know. The bay gelding won't take the bit cold. You have to warm it first, I know. I've been watching you do it for 3 months. The south fence. Eli, steady, I know. He closed his eyes. All right, he said. She went out. He lay on his back and felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember, completely useless. That kind of pain had nothing to do with the leg. She was up before him every morning. He'd hear the door open, the cold coming in briefly and gone, footsteps across the yard, the axe on the water trough ice, the sounds of the barn, the sounds of everything that needed doing being done. He'd lie there and listen, and think about what mornings used to sound like. Which was nothing, just the cold. She came in each evening, carrying the day in the set of her shoulders, snow and mud and hay. She'd take off her coat and make supper without being asked, and then sit with him. Every evening, they played chess, which she taught him. He lost 11 games in a row. He was counting. She was pretending not to notice he was counting. He was pretending not to notice she was pretending. It was a whole thing. They read aloud from the 2 books in the cabin, A Practical Guide to Agricultural Management, and a novel he'd found at Willis 3 years ago and never opened. The novel was better than expected. She read aloud well. He noticed that immediately. The way she felt the rhythm of a sentence. The way she let the quiet moments land without rushing past them. He told her this once. She looked up from the page. My mother used to read to me. Every night before everything changed, she looked at the book. She had very good taste in what to read, and bad taste in husbands? He hadn't meant to say it. She looked at him. And then, unexpectedly, she laughed. Short and surprised and completely real. Yes, she said. Terrible taste in husbands, but excellent taste in literature. One of those things, he smiled. She was still smiling when she looked back at the page. He stored that. Same place, getting crowded in there. The second week of November. A storm building all day, not the sharp, violent kind. The settled kind that comes in and stays. Nora came in from the evening chores holding herself wrong. He noticed immediately. Not exhaustion. Something else. She took off her coat, stood at the kitchen area with her back to him. Aldridge said something to me, she said, when he set your leg. Before I came back inside, Ellie waited. He said the angle of the break was irregular. He said nothing. He said it was probably just the way it happened. The ice, the tree shifting. She still had her back to him. But he said that in the right circumstances, if someone had disturbed the ground in that area before you went out there, she stopped the fire. The crow, the pattern. Ellie understood. He doesn't know, she said. He was clear about that. Could be entirely accidental. Probably is. She turned around. Her face was very controlled. But I wanted you to know, he said it. You should have all the information. He looked at the fire. Thought about the slope, the way the ground had given. The way it hadn't felt quite like the natural slippage of frozen earth. He hadn't let himself think about that too directly. Now he was thinking about it. If it was deliberate, he said carefully, then we have a larger problem than a contractual claim. Yes. She sat down across from him. I'm not frightened. I want to be clear about that. I'm angry. Those are different things, I know, and I have an idea. But I need to think it through properly before I tell you what it is. She paused. You're going to do something with the letter. She looked at him. The one from Hatch, he said. You've been thinking about it since you found it. You noticed that? I noticed things. Something shifted in her face. Not quite the smile. Yes, she said. I'm going to do something with the letter. But I need more than one letter. I need a pattern. Give me time, she said. He gave her time. In the 3rd week of November, Nora wrote letters. Late at night by the lamp, using the good paper she'd kept in her trunk. 4 or 5 letters, written carefully and at length. When she was done, she told him. The other women. The names in the letter. I wrote to addresses I could piece together from context. And to 2 matrimonial bureaus in Boston. Asking about records, she set down the pen. Women don't talk about this because it's shameful, because people ask what they did wrong. But if someone asks directly and explains why they need to know, some of them will answer, he thought about the women on trains. heading toward Crossroads. And then, he said, then we have more than one letter that Hatch can claim was misconstrued. We have a pattern, and a pattern is a different kind of problem for a man like Randall Hatch. Ellie said nothing for a moment. You should have been a lawyer, he said. I should have been a great many things, she said. But this is what I am now. And this is what I can do from here. December came. He was walking by early December. Badly, with a stick he hated and used anyway. Bush, because Nora's expression when he tried without it was more persuasive than any argument. But walking, she managed his recovery the way she managed everything. With complete seriousness about the goal and complete flexibility about the method. The fence can wait. It can't. It waited 8 years. That's different. Sit down. I'll lie. He sat down. The strange thing was that he didn't actually mind. He objected because he was built to object to sitting still. But under the objection, somewhere quiet, was the recognition of what it felt like to have a person who thought about your well-being as naturally as they thought about their own, who argued with you not to win, but because they wanted you whole. He hadn't had that in 8 years. He'd forgotten what it felt like. On the 3rd night of December, the big storm came, wind finding every gap in the walls, temperature dropping in stages, each one colder than the last. Nora had gone to bed. He was tending the fire when her door opened. I can't sleep, she said. The wind sounds like something trying to get in. Sit down. I'll make coffee, she sat. He made coffee. They sat together with the fire between them and the storm outside. She was quiet for a long time. Can I ask you something? Yes, that morning in Iron Falls, when you proposed. You said there were other reasons you weren't good at saying. She looked at the fire. I told you you didn't have to say them, but I want you to know. You can, if you ever want to. He looked at the fire too. I know I can, he said. I'm not asking you to right now, I know. Silence. Eli. Yeah, I love you. The fire cracked. The wind pushed through a gap and the flame bent sideways and recovered. He sat very still. I didn't plan it, she said. I didn't come here for that. I came here to survive. I stayed for other reasons. And somewhere in between all of it, you became the reason. She was looking at the fire, not at him. Because some true things you can't say while looking directly at the person you're saying them to. The way you work, the way you think, the way you stopped your horse in a storm for a woman you didn't know because you couldn't not stop. The way you let me in. Slowly, but actually in. Not just to the cabin. She touched her chest briefly. Here, he said nothing. But he reached over and took her hand. She went still. He held it, both hands around hers. Cold from the night air even close to the fire. And rough now in a way they hadn't been in July. The hands of a woman who'd been doing real work in a hard place and had not once complained about it. I'm not good at saying it, he said. I know, since the morning after the storm. When I walked in and you'd made the fire and put the flowers on the table, he looked at their hands. 8 years that cabin was mine. In one night you made it feel like someone actually lived there. She was very still. I don't know when it became more than that, he said. But it did. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. She turned to look at him properly. You showed me every single day, she said. That's not the same, Eli. Very gentle. For me it was. He looked at her. His wife, Nora Holt, who had come in a storm and stayed through a worse one. Who had held the whole place together for 8 weeks without complaint. Who had found the letter and kept it and built a plan and said nothing until the plan was ready. He brought her hand up and held it against his chest for a moment. I love you too, he said. In case that wasn't clear, she laughed. Surprised and real and full. It was becoming clearer, she said. But it's good to hear. They stayed by the fire until the storm quieted. Her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. The coffee going cold because neither of them thought about it. The door on the hinge, all the way open. Finally, outside the storm softened. By morning it would be over. Wyoming. January 1890, the storm was over. But the silence it left behind was the kind that asked questions. Ellie lay awake the morning after. Nora's head still on his shoulder, fire burned to red coals, the wind gone. Just the cold and the light, starting at the window edges, and the sound of her breathing, He had not slept much. Not because of the leg. Because he was thinking. Hatch was still out there. Crane was still on the bench. And somewhere, in other territories, other women were moving toward Crossroads, and strangers who had no intention of keeping their word. He thought about the letter. The 4 families Willa had mentioned. People who'd lost land through Crane's paperwork. The slope and the angle that Aldridge said was wrong. He was done lying still, not dramatically. Not the kind of done that requires a speech. Just quietly, internally finished with waiting. The kind of done that settles in your bones at 4 in the morning and is still there when the sun comes up. Done waiting. Done being the thing that was happening too. Nora stirred, opened her eyes. Looked at him. You didn't sleep, she said. Some. She sat up. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's in January. It is. And Randall Hatch has been operating since at least last spring. She was very still. And every week we wait, he said, is another woman on a train somewhere. Nora looked at the coals. Then she went to her room and came back with 2 envelopes. I got responses, she said. To the letters I sent in November, he read them. Ruth Alderman had traveled to Kansas Territory in the spring of 1888. Waited at a crossroads for 4 hours, walked the nearest town. Spent 3 months in a laundry before she had enough to get home, had never told anyone, until someone finally asked. The Bureau in Boston had records of 3 fee payments under a name matching Hatch's known alias, dates, amounts, women who had been matched and then unmatched without notice or refund. Ely set the letters down. That's 5, he said. Mama, that we know of. Probably more. Ruth knows of another woman who won't speak about it. He looked at his coffee. We need Willa, he said. Yes, and Foss. Yes. And the families Crane took land from. Nora looked at him over her cup. How's the leg? Manageable. She looked at him with the expression that meant she had a more accurate assessment and was choosing not to argue about terminology. All right, she said. Then let's start. He rode to Willa Sutton's 3 days later. The leg making its opinions known at every uneven step of the horse. Willa opened her door before he reached the porch. You look better than expected, she said. Everyone says that like they expected something worse. We did. Inside, over coffee, she told him what she knew. It's taken 3 years. All with water access. All through paperwork. Liens, disputed filings. The kind that takes a lawyer to untangle. And most of these families didn't have one. She looked at him. Your land is the last piece. The Eastern Creek runs through your east corner. That creek feeds 3 operations downstream. Whoever controls your water controls this valley's growing capacity. Ellie said nothing. Hatch brought the bride scheme. Willa continued. Crane provided legal cover. If you'd been preoccupied with the claim on Nora, or if she'd gone back with him, or if the accident had worked the way it was probably meant to, I'd have had too many problems to fight all at once. Small pressures from multiple directions until a man makes a decision he wouldn't otherwise make, not improvised. Planned. How long have you known, he said, suspected. Not known. There's a difference. She paused. I didn't have evidence until Nora's letter. He nodded. She's remarkable, Willa said. I know. You found a good one, Eli Holt. She found herself, he said. I just didn't right away. He left with a list and a plan and the particular clarity that comes from sharing a problem with someone who's been thinking about it longer than you have. Then he went to the blacksmith, then the doctor. Then, one by one, to the 4 families who had lost land to Crane's paperwork. He didn't make speeches, just showed up. Sat at their tables. Put down what he had, the letter, Ruth Alderman's account, Willa's connections, the pattern, and asked, you in or you out? The first family, the Marins, looked at each other for a long time. Harlan Mearns was 62 and had lost his eastern pasture to a disputed filing 18 months ago and hadn't spoken of it publicly since. His wife looked at Eli, then at the letter, then at Eli again. What do you need? She said. Your account in writing. Signed? She looked at her husband. He nodded once. She reached for the pen. The second family took longer. They'd tried proper channels before. The channels had led directly back to Crane. Eli didn't argue, just said, Because this time there are 6 of us instead of 1. And because Nora found proof that goes back further than Wyoming. And because Mrs. Alderton is coming through Iron Falls in February. The name landed. Mrs. Alderton, whose husband's already extended across the territory. Known for caring about the correct operation of territorial law in ways that were more than ceremonial, they signed. The third family signed without much hesitation. They'd been waiting for someone to start something. The fourth family was the hardest, the Calloways. 3 children, the youngest still small enough to carry. They'd lost the most. A substantial piece of land in the family since the father came. Lost it to a filing he knew was fraudulent and couldn't prove. Ely sat at their table for an hour. Didn't push, just sat. Finally, the father said, "If this doesn't work, if our names come back on us, then I'll stand next to you," Ely said. Whatever comes back, the man looked at his wife. His wife looked at the youngest child. In the corner with a wooden block, understanding none of this, "Sign it, Thomas." She said he signed. Ely rode home in the late afternoon of the 3rd day out. Nora was in the garden, not gardening. It was January, standing in the frozen ground looking at what it would become. She turned when she heard, "Bess, 4 families," he said, dismounting. All signed. She let out a breath that had been held for a while. "And Willa has contacts in the territorial administration going back 20 years, he said. "Mrs. Alderton's February visit is when we use them." "The hearing needs to be public," Nora said. "Not Crane's courtroom. Foss already offered the church." She looked at him. "When did you talk to Foss?"
"On the way back. When did you have time?"
"I didn't sleep much." She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed, quiet and real. "Come inside," she said. "Your legs sounds terrible from here." "My legs sounds fine, Ely. You're limping so dramatically the chickens look concerned." He looked at the chickens. They looked like chickens. He went inside anyway. "I need to write to Ruth Alderman again," Nora said. "I want her account in a form that can be read aloud. Can she come here? She can't afford to travel." He looked at her. "What if we paid for it?" Nora stopped. "That's 3 weeks of egg profit. I know what it costs. She doesn't know us. She knows you. You wrote to her. That's not the same as." "Write to her," he said. "Tell her what's happening. Tell her what we're building. And tell her that if she comes, she won't be standing alone." Nora looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up the pen. February arrived the way February does in Wyoming. Without apology. February cold was tired. Done proving things. Still cold anyway. Ely's leg was close to healed. "He'd probably have a slight pull in it for years," Aldridge said. A reminder. He'd had other reminders. A scar on his left hand from a knife that slipped in year 2. A particular way his shoulder moved in cold from a fall in year 4. The body keeps records. He just added one more. Ruth Alderman came on the Tuesday stage. Ely picked her up at the Iron Falls station, leaving Nora at the cabin. He wanted to bring Ruth in quietly, without the town watching a woman arrive under scrutiny before she'd had a chance to settle. Ruth Alderman was 51. Gray, haired, practical-looking in the way of women who have solved many problems without help and stopped dressing for other people's opinions. She stepped off the stage with one bag, and the look of someone who had considered carefully whether to come and had decided yes, with full awareness of what that yes cost. She shook his hand. "You're Nora's husband," she said. "Yes, she wrote well about you." "Thank you," he said. "She wrote accurately." "Which is different. She said you were the kind of man who stops." He picked up her bag. "Let's get you home." Nora was waiting. She and Ruth shook hands, and then looked at each other, the way that people who have communicated, honestly, through letters look at each other when they finally meet. Like recognizing the shape of something they already knew. "Thank you for coming," Nora said. "You asked directly," Ruth said, "and you explained why it mattered. Not just to you." She looked around the cabin, the flowers in the jar, the organized shelves. The evidence of 2 people building a real life. I didn't want to come. I want to be honest about that. "I know," Nora said. "But you were right. If it happened, to me and to you and to the others, it's still happening. Right now. And staying quiet doesn't protect the next woman." "No," Nora said. "It doesn't." Ruth sat down. Eli made coffee, and the three of them sat at the table and built the last pieces of what they were going to do. The hearing was set for February 14th. Reverend Foss announced it from the pulpit the Sunday before. Not as a legal proceeding, as a community meeting, about land rights and territorial law and several matters of significant local concern. Everyone was welcome. The church would be open. Foss was good at language. He chose his carefully. Crane heard about it by Monday. Came to the church on Tuesday, while Eli was there helping Foss rearrange the furniture. Crane came in, without knocking, a habit of men who are used to rooms accommodating themselves at their arrival, in his 60s. Well-dressed, silver hair. The kind of face that probably looked trustworthy in dim light. Holt. Crane. I understand there's a community meeting. There is, about land rights, among other things. Crane looked around the church, at Foss, who was moving a pew with careful attention to not looking at Crane. This isn't the appropriate venue for legal matters, Crane said. Ellie set down the pew end he was holding. It's not a legal proceeding. It's a community meeting on church property. Reverend Foss can hold one anytime he chooses. Whatever you're planning, Crane said. I want you to consider carefully. You have a new wife. A property. Things that could be affected by the wrong kind of attention. Ellie said nothing for 3 seconds. Just looked at Crane. That sounds like it might be a threat, he said quietly. Crane smiled the smile that knows it isn't a smile, an observation, about how complicated things can become. Eli said. He picked up the other end of the pew. We'll see you Thursday. Doors open at 10. Crane left. Foss straightened up. He'll try something. He'll try to shut it down procedurally. Or bring Hatch. Or both. Eli moved to the next pew, but he'll come. Because not coming looks worse, and when he comes, then we let what's true be true in front of everyone. Mrs. Alderton arrived on Wednesday. She came every February, part of the territorial circuit, a practical woman in her late 50s who had, over the years, developed her own considerable understanding of what the law was supposed to do, and often didn't. Nora went to see her alone. This was Nora's piece. She had built it. The letters, the records, the connections. This part was hers. Stayed at the cabin, checked on the horses 3 times, fixed the gap in the south wall that had been there since winter. Came inside, sat down, got up, went back out. He was splitting wood for no particular reason when Nora came back. She came across the yard differently than she'd left. He stopped splitting. She already knew about Crane, Nora said. Not everything, but enough that I put in front of her wasn't a surprise. She's been watching him for 2 years, waiting for something documented enough to act on, and now she has it. Nora looked at the woodpile, the cabin, the sky going its February colors. She said Ruth. Coming was the thing. A record of evidence. A person standing up in a room and saying, "This happened to me." That's a different kind. The kind that moves things. He put down the axe. Nora was looking at him with the look he'd cataloged early and never found the right label for. What? He said. Nothing. I'm just. She stopped. Started again. I'm glad you stopped your horse. In the storm, she said. Then she stopped. Like she'd almost said it again and caught herself. Never mind. I just wanted to say it one more time. She looked at him. I'm done now. He crossed the yard. Put his arms around her. She put her head against his shoulder. They stood there in the February cold. The woodpile half done. The horses in the barn. The creek running somewhere under the ice on the eastern edge of their land. Theirs tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. The 14th of February, 1890. Cold. Clear. The sky the specific blue that only exists in deep winter when there's no moisture left to soften it. Iron Falls filled up not just townspeople, families from the surrounding homesteads who'd heard about the meeting and had their own reasons to be there. People who'd lost things and hadn't said so publicly. People who simply knew when something important was happening. The way communities know by 9:30 the church was full. Standing room at the back, Eli and Nora came in together. Ruth walked beside Nora. The 4 families were already there, seated near the front, in an arrangement that hadn't been coordinated, but that made its own kind of statement. Willa was in the 3rd row. gave Eli a single nod when they came in. He nodded back. Crane was there, 4th row, further back than he usually positioned himself, preferring the background, as always. The man who had operated from behind things for 3 years, Hatch, was not there. Eli had half expected him, half hoped for it if he was honest. But absence told its own story. A man who doesn't show up to defend himself has already made his decision. Either way, it was noted. By everyone. Foss opened the meeting the way he opened everything, finding the tone that was serious without being heavy, clear without being competitive. He explained what the meeting was. Then he asked Eli to speak first. Eli stood. He was not a speaker. He knew that, and said so. But this was necessary. He was brief. He described the land, his 8 years on it, the water rights, the burn, the slope. What Willa had found about Crane's pattern with the 4 families. He used plain words. He didn't editorialize, he just described. Then he put the letter on the table, at the front of the church, Randall Hatch's letter. The one Nora had found in her trunk on the 2nd morning. That's in his handwriting, Eli said. 3. Names, financial records from a bureau he operated. We have documentation from Boston to match it. He sat down. Nora stood. She had the ability to speak with precision and without anger, which is the most powerful combination in a room full of people watching for fairness. She laid it out. The letters she'd written, the responses, the bureau records, the dates and amounts and the pattern. At minimum 5 women, she said. Probably more. Women who came in good faith, who traveled long distances on the word of a man who had no intention of keeping it, who arrived and were left with nothing in territory they didn't know. She looked at the room. Ruth Alderman is one of them. Ruth stood. The room went very quiet. Ruth was not a dramatic person. She spoke the way she'd written, plainly, accurately, with the weight of someone who has carried something for a long time and has finally decided to set it down. She described the crossroads in Kansas, the 4 hours, the walk, the laundry in a town where no one knew her name. I was ashamed for 2 years, she said, because I thought I'd made a poor decision and should have known better. She paused. But I made a reasonable decision based on a deliberate lie. The shame belongs to the man who lied, not to me. The room held still for a moment. Then something moved through it. Not sound exactly. A collective shift, the kind that happens when many people recognize something true at once. Mrs. Alderton was in the 2nd row. She let the room breathe. Then she stood. When she stood, the quality of attention in the room changed, in the specific way it does when the person rising has actual authority, and everyone knows it. She was brief. She said she had been made aware of several matters relating to the administration of territorial law in Iron Falls. She said she had now seen documentation she found substantial and credible. She said she would be recommending a formal inquiry into the land filings associated with Judge Amos Crane and the matrimonial operations associated with Randall Hatch. She said this without drama, like it was already done, because in the way that mattered it was. The roar erupted, not violently, just loudly. 3 years of concerns and suspicions and things people had known and not said because they hadn't known how, released all at once. Crane stood up, started to say something about procedural jurisdiction. He got about half a sentence out. The blacksmith who had been sitting to Crane's left, and who was a man of considerable size and very few words, said, "Sit down, Amos," not loud, not angry, just. "Sit down." Crane looked at him, looked at the room, saw what was in the room, sat down. He didn't speak it again. The meeting went on for another hour. People said things. The 4 families spoke briefly. Foss kept it orderly. Mrs. Alderton took notes in a small book. At the end, Foss closed in prayer, the practical frontier kind, not long, not ornate. Just thank you for this room and these people, and the courage to use them for what's right. And then it was over. Eli stood on the church steps in the February cold, watched people file out, watched Crane leave quickly, without looking at anyone. The walk of a man who had just watched the structure he'd built begin to give way. Ruth came to stand beside him. "Is it done?" she said. "Not completely. Legal things take time. But the shape of it is done," she nodded. "Thank you. For the train fare. "Thank you for coming." She looked at him. Nora said, "You stopped your horse in a storm." She keeps telling people that, because it's the whole story. In one sentence, Ruth said. He said nothing. She went to find Nora. He stayed on the steps, the town moving around him, horses and wagons and people talking, really talking, processing and comparing and figuring out what comes next. He stood in the middle of it and felt, more solidly than he had before, that he was actually in this place. Not just on it, in it. Part of something, which was not what he'd planned when he came here 8 years ago. He'd planned to be separate, sufficient, to need the land and the work and nothing else. He'd planned. And then it turned out that what you plan and what you build are sometimes entirely different things. Nora found him on the steps. She had Ruth on one side and Willa on the other, and she was talking, really talking. Alive with the particular energy that comes when something has gone right and you can finally let yourself feel that it has. She saw him. Said something to Willa, came over, stood beside him, looked at the street. "It worked," she said. "It worked, the land. Crane can't touch it. No, and Hatch. Mrs. Alderton said the inquiry will take time, but he won't be operating. Not here, not for a while. Good." She was quiet for a moment. "Ruth is going to stay another week. She and Willa have been talking. Willa thinks there might be something for her here if she wants it." In the boarding house, he looked at Nora. "I suggested it," she said, simply. Of course she did. He said nothing. She said nothing. The town went around them, cold and clear and bright, with February sun that had no warmth but had light, which was something. He took her hand. She looked down at it, then at him, that corner of the East Field, she said, "In the spring. Larger vegetable section. We can sell to Willa. And I've been reading about herb cultivation. There's a market in Iron Falls for dried herbs that nobody's meeting, all right. And the chicken operation. 20 more birds." 20? The math works. It probably did. He'd stopped questioning her math, and she said. Then stopped. He waited. "I want to plant something just for the sake of it," she said. "Not for profit. Not for use. Just because it's beautiful." She looked at the frozen street. Roses. Along the south fence, he looked at her. "Roses are a lot of work," he said. "I know. Wyoming's hard on roses. I know that too." She looked at him. "But if something survives Wyoming, it tends to be something real." He thought about that. About everything that had survived Wyoming, the land, the cabin, the creek in the east corner, him. And now. "Her, plant the roses," he said. She smiled. Not the careful version, the real one. The one he'd been keeping since the wedding day. They rode home as the light went. Neither of them said much. They didn't need to. He believed in stopping. In the moment when you could go past something, or you could stop, he had stopped. And it turned out that stopping was the whole thing. Just that one choice, made in the rain on a road he'd ridden 100 times. Choosing to see what was there instead of looking past it. And everything else followed from that. The cabin came into view. Their cabin, smoke from the chimney. Ruth was inside keeping the fire, which she'd offered to do, and which Eli suspected was less about helpfulness and more about giving them the ride home alone, something he appreciated without saying so. Nora saw it too. Smoke, Ruth, she thinks of things. Yes, they came to the property gate. He got down first, his leg making the February cult's opinion about his recovery known. Persistently. He managed. He always managed. He held the gate. She rode through, looked down at him from the horse. 8 years, she said. He latched the gate, looked up. 8 years alone on this land, and then a storm. She paused. "And then me." He said nothing. "Is it very different from what you planned?" He thought about what he'd planned. The solitude, the sufficiency. All those years of convincing himself that alone was enough. "Yes," he said. "Better or just different?" He looked at the cabin, the smoke. The fence line he'd repaired, and the east field and the creek running under the ice. Looked at her. "Better," he said. She looked at him from the height of the horse, the February light on her face, the blue ribbon at her collar, her dark hair. Those eyes he had stopped trying not to catalog. "Good," she said. She rode to the barn. He followed. They put the horses up together, working in the synchrony that comes from doing something the same person, enough times that you stop having to think about it. He took the saddles. She took the brushes. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. Outside the barn, the sky was going dark, stars beginning at the edges, one at a time, then faster. The creek somewhere under the ice making its sound, quiet and constant. The sound of water that doesn't stop just because it's trying to freeze it. He stood in the barn door and looked at his land, Thayer's, every acre of it, every fence post and field corner and frozen ditch, and the East Creek and the rows they hadn't planted yet, and the chickens not yet bought. And the spring that was not here yet but was coming, all of it, his, hers, built from nothing, defended, kept, not because it had been easy, because they hadn't stopped. Nora came to stand beside him, looked out at it too. He put his arm around her. She leaned in. And they stood there as the stars came out one at a time, and then all at once, the way they always did in Wyoming, where the sky goes forever in every direction, and there's nothing between you and all of it. Nothing required. Nothing left to prove. Just this. Just them. Just the land that had asked everything of them and gotten it, and given everything back.